Hello everybody and welcome to Ultimate Admiral Dreadnaughts Simulator. It's not a simulator, is it? Ultimate Admiral Dreadnaughts. One day I'll get the name right. Today we are starting a new campaign as the Austro-Hungarians. However, we're doing something a little bit different. Now, we are effectively going to be really looking at a super technologically advanced nation. So we're going to be looking at tech and interesting things like that. Now, the story is Austro-Hungarian Empire. At this stage, we didn't really have much of a fleet. Our fleet mainly consists of patrol ships. Such as the Cross here, which were fairly fast. Can we get this to be a bit longer, perhaps? Not quite. Not quite. Okay. Mainly designed to patrol around the Adriatic. It's a patrol ship. It's not really anything major. So, coming into this war, we are very unprepared. Now, our navy is actually well trained, considering we put a lot of effort into training our navy, and we put a lot of effort into, as I said, into technology of our navy as well. Go to 20 knots. What's that going to do? That's much better. Although engine efficiency is still terrible. Not much we can do in that respect. Okay, but still, we'll keep it as that because we want. It's got a fairly slow acceleration rate. It's a fairly, you know. A fairly standard little scout cruiser. Designed to just patrol around the Adriatic Sea. You know, it's not really there to fight wars. It's just there to keep the peace, effectively, in the area, and that's what its main job was. We'll go 76s. Let's go 76s. Let's see how that works out. Fairly well armed, you know. Fairly decent guns on board. You know, it's not a pushover, of course. And, you know, it's a fairly standard designed ship, you know, a fairly standard light cruiser of the time. Slightly, it's almost like a hybrid of a light cruiser and a sort of armoured cruiser, you know, semi-armoured cruiser, we'd call it. Protected cruiser, let's say a protected cruiser. pull these back a little tiny bit. Yeah, so it's a fairly, it's not the greatest ship in the world, but it's got uh, it's got the capability of defending the seas. It's not the most stable of ships, and it's not very well balanced. The crew do complain of the ship tending to go bow into the water, mainly because of that four torpedo tube launcher. If we remove that, say, yeah, let's remove that, make that a little bit more efficient. There we go. So it still has a little bit of foreweight, so it tends to plough through the waves a little bit when it's rough, but luckily through the area it's operating in, it doesn't get too rough, so the seas aren't too high. It's not like it's operating in the Atlantic. It's a fairly well balanced ship, and a fairly capable ship as well, with a 20 knots top speed. It's a fairly fast boat for the time period. So the Cross class light cruiser is our main staple. And then of course we have our torpedo boats. Actually, let's keep it as the alligator. So the Gator class little torpedo boat. Slider right. There we go, 275. A fairly long little torpedo boat for the time. It was a fairly long little boat. With a fairly decent top speed of 26 knots. She had some fairly okay crew compartments. The ship was actually quite comfortable for its small crew. And it was fairly nippy as well. The boat was very quick indeed. The ship had fairly poor pitch, so it didn't do well in rough weather, but it was fairly well balanced and had a fairly decent gunnery capability of 376mm guns at the front, as well as twin torpedo tubes, making it one of the more heavily armed torpedo boats of the time period. She was capable of, as I say, 20... I'm going to speed up a little bit more. Capable of 28 knots, which made the ship quite nippy indeed. and was relatively liked by its crew despite its shortcomings. The ship was incredibly watertight, with many bulkheads underneath to keep her crew relatively safe. Of 20 souls on board this relatively small boat. The majority of the crew were busy down in the engine room stoking the boilers, of course, to keep up her top speed. The Alligator class, though, was a beloved ship of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And that's our two ships that we're going to start with. So we're going to have the light cruiser and torpedo boats. So, as I said, we're effectively behind the times. Our enemies are Britain, France and Italy, who have an enormous complement of capital ships and a vast amount of light cruisers and torpedo boats. Our allies, the Germans, have a decent array of capital ships in 7 battleships and 19 armoured cruisers, 23 light cruisers and 25 torpedo boats. So 8 light cruisers and 20 torpedo boats. And let's start the campaign. So our meagre navy of 28 ships had to contend against a vast array of enemies, the biggest of which were the 48 ships of the Italian Navy, the Regina Marina, with their 5 battleships, 9 armoured cruisers, 12 light cruisers, 22 torpedo boats. So they had us outmatched in every way. At the outbreak of the war, the Admiral Spawn and the Polar were out on patrol. We're just leaving port for patrol duties. They were just on their way to do their normal thing of, you know, just patrol duties and things like that. The Maros and 4 of the Alligator class torpedo boats were out on manoeuvres. While the rest of the ships remained in dockyard. January 1890, the Germans declared war upon Britain. Her allies, France and Italy, came in. The Entente became active. And poor old Austro-Hungary was kind of a little bit caught with its pants down. The Austrian government, the Austrian-Hungarian government, was sort of a little bit left in the lurch, unsure what was going to happen to them. Luckily, they were focusing heavily on training of their crews as well as the technology. However, Italy, with its significant advantage in ships, was able to blockade instantly. They came out to attack the task force of the Admiral Spawn and the Polar with the battleship Iola and 3 torpedo boats. So let's get started on battles, shall we? So the enemies to the west. Okay. What's the weather like? Fairly decent weather, actually, which is good for us. Let's go abreast, loose formation. Okay, so first contact in the war. Our ships were caught by surprise by the Italians, as they were busy patrolling the Adriatic Sea. All of a sudden they spotted a battleship on the horizon, and it opened fire. 2 torpedo boats were soon spotted. Our ships quickly engaged as soon as they opened fire. The 76mm guns doing a great job, and our crews having some advantage with their gunnery training. Causing one of the torpedo boats to instantly break off and run away. One of their torpedo boats charged at us, at our ships. Their torpedo boats armed with twin torpedo launchers on the aft deck. The Polar was going to be torpedoed. It was looking bad for her. 2 torpedoes struck the side of the ship, instantly putting a hole in her the size of a small ship. This left her sinking. The Admiral Spahn, seeing what was happening, decided it was time to get out of Dodge. First blood went to Italy. The crew of the Polar were still unsure what had happened, as their ship sank rather quickly. Luckily, one of the enemy torpedo boats sunk after taking significant damage. However, being chased down by 2 torpedo boats, the Admiral Spahn had to get out of there. The torpedo boats had the advantage of speed on their side, with a top speed of almost 32 knots. The Italian torpedo boats were incredibly fast. The Italian battleship, seeing what was going on, decided to pull out of the battle, noticing that the Austro-Hungarians were pretty much done for. However, with the gun range of her 305mm guns, she set loose upon the Admiral Spahn, landing a shot on her stern, blasting a hole in the aft belt. The ship on fire and flooding quite heavily in the rear quarters was struggling. She managed to sink one of the other torpedo boats, firing furiously at the Alabada, which was taking on water rather quickly. The Spahn had to slow down to 17 knots as water came on board at a vast rate of knots. Finally, there was just 1 torpedo boat left in the unprovoked assault by the Italians. However, things were not good. Because of her speed loss, the enemy torpedo boat would be capable of coming in for a torpedo attack. The Admiral Spahn needed to really let loose upon all of its guns to stop the Pallade from launching its torpedoes. If a Pallade launched torpedoes, it would be gone for the Admiral Spahn. However, the Spahn launched her own torpedoes out against the Pallade, hitting her with 2, blasting the ship out of the water and out of existence. The Admiral Spahn needed to escape now. She decided to put the smokescreen out and try and escape from the Iola, the capital ship of Italy. Out of spotting range, the Admiral Spahn managed to sneak away, the crew furiously trying to patch up the holes underneath the waterline. Only capable of a speed of 17 knots, the ship was slowed down, meaning the Italian capital ship did have a speed advantage upon her. The battle was not yet done. Noticing that the capital ship was continuing to chase her down, the captain of the Admiral Spawn, one Heinz Fredrickson, decided to turn around and fight valiantly in the scout cruiser. The Admiral Spawn spun around and let loose with its guns, firing a salvo upon the battleship with barely a chance of causing damage with her 127mm guns. She knew it was going to be a fight that she was not going to come away from. The battleship opened up again with its 305mm guns. Its secondary started to open up. The only chance the Admiral Spawn had was to get into torpedo range and try and let loose upon the enemy capital ship. However, with her speed advantage, the capital ship would have the manoeuvrability advantage. The Admiral Spawn needed to get into this battle. It needed to get into torpedo range. It needed to let loose a salvo upon this ship to try and slow it down to get herself safe. If they could cause flooding on the enemy ship, they might be able to sneak away. They once again fired up the smoke generators, trying to get into a distance where they could let loose their torpedoes. The brave crew valiantly fought upon, coming under fire by more of the secondary weapons from the Italian capital ship. 76mm guns opening up a full broadside upon her, with 152mm guns and of course the main guns opening up. The Admiral Spawn needed to turn. Needed to get torpedoes off. It needs to torpedo this battleship. It needs to actually get some hits upon her. If it can actually get torpedoes on this ship, it might be able to escape with its life. But things are not looking good for the valiant scout cruiser. The enemy capital ship able to completely outmaneuver the scout cruiser with her lack of speed from flooding, was simply able to just run away and keep at a distance, safe from torpedoes. The Admiral Spawn, still fighting valiantly, was trying to pepper her with as much firepower as possible, but being outmatched in every single area. The Admiral Spawn finally took a shot to its engine room. The ship almost dead in the water. Could not do anything to fight off the enemy battleship. Her only hope was if the Italian captain made a mistake. Her guns barely able to penetrate the armour of the ginormous ship that she was fighting. Still fired on. As the day went on, the ship was still fighting valiantly. Long after its partner, the Paola, had sunk, the Admiral Spawn continued firing guns. She turned hard right, which is I always get port and starboard mixed up. Starboard, hard to starboard, that's the one I'm looking for. Just to get, so she could fire full broadside upon the battleship. This left her open to the enemy's full firepower, of course, of those 305mm guns. The enemy battleship would have no issue penetrating the plucky little light cruiser. As the battle continued, ammunition started to run a little bit dry for the main guns. They managed to set fire to the stern of the Ola, which was promptly put out by her crew. Once again, the smoke generators were working. The crew had managed to repair the engine in the battle and were once back to a full speed of 17 knots, again setting fires aboard the enemy ship. The Admiral Spahn was suffering, but she was putting up the best fight she could. She had one more chance of a torpedo run on the enemy capital ship. She needed to get close enough. She needed to actually launch her fish out. She could possibly get a hit on the battleship. But she was starting to lift heavily to starboard. Heavily to port, even. Yeah, port. Right, port. Which was causing issues with stability. The ship started to slow as more and more water came on board, flooding underneath the ship, flooding the lower decks. The boilermen continued to stoke the engine to try and get as much speed out of the ship as possible. But with the flooding on board, the ship was almost dead in the water. The ship had to do a hard turn to starboard. Hard turn to port? Yeah, hard turn to port. Left. Hard left. Oh, God, I always get port and starboard mixed up. Why do I do that? My brain just does not work for port and starboard sometimes. The lack of a front torpedo launcher meant she had to turn broadside to get these torpedoes off. But there was not much she could do. The enemy battleship was still moving at almost full pace. Finally, a shell came through, taking out her rudder. The ship was unable to turn. Her only chance was to get beside the ship and launch torpedoes. But the heavy firing of the enemy battleship was too much for the light cruiser to take. The light cruiser started to take on more and more water. The casemates sank below the waterline. Crew busily trying to shut every single compartment they had. With only a small amount of bulkheads on board, though, they were unable to keep the flooding under control. One of the 305mm went straight through her main belt, destroying 2 of their engines. With both engines down, the ship was cruising at a speed of less than 4 knots. The captain of the Admiral Spahn knew that this was it. The ship was going down. There was not much he could do in this respect. But still, they fought on valiantly. The crew knew that if they could try and get some damage done to this, then at least it would have to go to port and have to get some repairs done. Valiantly they fought on throughout the day. Despite the sizable difference in displacement, the Aola weighing in and costing almost 4.6 million, weighing in at 10,000 tons. The Admiral Spahn fought on. The plucky little light cruiser tried its best to continue the battle. But, being dead in the water, the ship was almost there for the picking. The enemy battleship just simply circled its prey, firing off guns with impunity against a much lighter ship. A final salvo came in, blowing a hole in her side, sinking the Admiral Spahn. The opening day of the war did not go well for the Austro-Hungarian fleet. Losing 2 of their light cruisers, the Empire was in serious risk of failing. Things were not looking good at all. However, there was a chance that they could get some kind of revenge, as the light cruiser Maros, with its envoy of alligator-class torpedo boats, came across a rather large convoy of ships. 19 ships. 19 merchant ships being escorted by an armoured cruiser and a single torpedo boat. This was their chance to take the fight back to Italy. Having heard the news that 2 of the light cruisers had already been sunk, the captain of the Maros decided it was time to strike back. The battle was on. The fight was here. The plan was hatched for 3 of the torpedo boats to split up. The Alligator number T1 would follow the Maros into battle. They would try and hunt down the enemy trade ships. The Maros and the T1 would fight the enemy armoured cruiser. T1's job was to get in close, launch torpedoes, and get out as fast as possible on the heavily armoured cruiser. If she could get this torpedo salvo off, it could change this battle and could be the chance that the Austro-Hungarian Empire needed. She got in close. The T1, launching her torpedoes, would get 2 direct hits on the midship of the Delfino armoured cruiser. The Alligator would take a punishing from this. But the Delfino was stricken by the 2 torpedo hits midship. This left her unable to move almost. The rest of the torpedo boats could see an opportunity here. They were tasked to engage the trade ships, the merchant ships. Tasked to take them out. It was their job to try and take out as many merchant ships as possible. Maros herself could see some of the merchant ships as well. With Delfino stricken, barely able to fire its weapons, it was a great opportunity for the Austro-Hungarian Empire to get revenge. Centauro torpedo boat came in, attacking, but took a torpedo instantly. A second torpedo. The T-14 Alligator class, unable to avoid one of the other torpedoes, sadly would be stricken. Taking 2 torpedoes, she was sunk instantly. However, the rest of the squad could see their opportunity, and it was a free-for-all on the merchant ships, as Delfino sat there stricken. Unable to do anything to defend the merchant ships, just having to watch on as the onslaught begun. The 76mm guns on board the torpedo boats proved to be fairly useful against the trade ships. They were capable of dealing out some fair damage. The trade ships tried to ram the little torpedo boats, trying their very best to take them out. The ramming proved fairly significant, but the trade ships were soon to be overrun. the Maros able to deal some absolute devastating blows. Torpedoes from the torpedo boats were absolutely devastating to the enemy merchant ships. Causing a huge amount of damage to them. The enemy merchant ships were trying their best to run, to get out of dodge, to try and escape the onslaught of these tiny little torpedo boats, chewing away at them. With this victory, the Austro-Hungarian Empire were back in the war. They had to be mindful of the armoured cruiser, of course, still afloat, but barely able to do anything in its stricken condition. The ship was listing heavily. It had lost one of its main guns and was in serious strife. As the Alligator T-18 randomly rammed one of the enemy merchant ships for no reason. The Admiral was left wondering what its crews were up to. With almost the whole Italian trade fleet sunk, the merchant navy took a vast blow. It was up to the Maros now to come in and finish the coup de grace to the Delfino. It was decided to do it with torpedoes. She would smoke up and head in. With the Alligator T2, T18 and T1 in retreat, after using up their full complement of torpedoes, they would come back later on to try and finish a blow to the remaining trade fleet. The Maros had to get close enough to the armoured cruiser to launch her torpedoes. Although the cruiser was stricken and unable to move, she was still a deadly foe. With torpedoes out, the Maros' task was now to start to retreat and avoid the enemy torpedoes. With 2 torpedo hits on the armoured cruiser, a flash fire soon broke out and the Delfino sank. The Austro-Hungarian Empire had taken a massive blow to the Italian fleet, sinking all but 3 of its trade ships. The Italian economy was sure to be stricken with this, as well as one of their armoured cruisers and a torpedo boat. Torpedo boot? Gone all Canadian. As well as one of their torpedo boats. With just light damage to the Hungarian fleet and the unfortunate sinking of the T-14, it was still a great victory to the Austro-Hungarian Empire. However, they knew that they had to, well, they had to do something to fight the Italians. They had to build new ships. Luckily, new ships were on the way. But there was one last chance The torpedo boat fleet had a chance to take a strike back against the Italian battleship, the Elo. And they wanted to try and take a strike. Sending out 4 of the Alligator-class torpedo boats was an opportunity they could not pass up on. The torpedo boat T5 caught the enemy by surprise in thick fog, launching one of its torpedoes instantly, striking the ship on the stern. The rest of the fleet had an opportunity here. It was the chance to take out an incredible target opportunity. The Elo had left itself open after the battle, sinking 2 of the light cruisers of the Empire. T5's second torpedo would strike true, straight to the midship, blasting a huge hole in the enemy battleship. T5 had to get out of there quickly though, because those guns would be deadly. The enemy battleship lost full propulsion, and now it was up to the squadron of T12, T9 and T15 to finish her off. It was their job to get in as quick as possible, launch their torpedoes and then escape. This was still a risky operation for the 3 torpedo boats. They still had a chance of failure. They still had a chance of being sunk. They still had to go up against a battleship. Their ship's a mere 275 tons against 10, almost 11,000 tons of enemy battleship. If they could sink her without losses, this would be a great victory for the Austro-Hungarian fleet. As T12 got hit heavily, she launched both of her torpedoes, hitting the enemy battleship heavily. T12 was damaged. T9 came in for her run. Torpedoes were launched. The Elo was sinking fast. She was listing heavily, and she was down before the torpedo struck. The final salvo of torpedoes, making sure that the Elo would never sail again. The victory came at barely any cost. 3 crewmen were lost on board the torpedo boats, compared to 718 souls aboard the Elo-class battleship. The Austro-Hungarian torpedo boats came home victorious, proud and happy with their victory. They had come back, managing to sink the ship that had sunk 2 of the nation's light cruisers. And with that, we'll end today's video. Well, we're going to start designing some new ships now. So we're going to start actually building some new boats. So this should be interesting. As I said, our nation has been busy doing experimentation and learning some new techniques. So we have some more advanced technology available to us than the enemy. We'll actually skip forward 1 more month, I think. There we go. And that will be that. That's our that's the technology that we've effectively learned. We've basically jumped forward technologically wise and really got to a point where we can, well, we can do well. And despite only having 25 ships at the moment, we will soon jump up as the Hungarian Empire has been busy building ships in secret. The Italians will soon realise that they have picked on the wrong people. Okay, until next time, it's me, Carl Screelyzilla, wishing you all the best, and I'll see you all again soon.